So, good morning to everyone. Uh, so today, thank you for the organizers of Remade for inviting me. Thank you. I don't know if Adam is in the room for suggesting my name, since we did this Remade project during my thesis, which I defended in October, last October, 2025. And the thesis, basically, that was a core part of my thesis on the characterization, and that allowed me to really advance on the thesis work. It's composing a very big part of the manuscript, so I'm really grateful for that. It's a really nice, and every opportunity I have, I I will talk about remade and try to expand this concept to other researchers. So currently, I'm a postdoctoral researcher, still in IMN, Institut de Matériaux in Nantes, in France. Uh, but I've been working with energy storage. I'm still working with energy storage. So my thesis work consisted in the recycling of heavy metal containing adsorbents into electrodes for energy storage. So I did that under Thierry Brousse and Olivier Cronier. So that was part of the Destiny project, which is a battery or energy storage program Marie Curie co-funded in Europe with 50 PhD students uh, in energy storage. That's why I had also a secondment in Chalmers University under Patrick Johansen. So basically, to give uh, a little bit of the context of the thesis, I'll go briefly through the introduction about wastewater. So wastewater is the inevitable result of human production, and industrial production might result in heavy metals going into the water streams. So we know all drains lead to the ocean. So this water needs to be treated before getting back to the water streams. And this water might come from different sources, and several heavy metals. They present a really an issue in this sense. So there are several ways of treating this wastewater, but the thesis focused on the adsorption, which is a passive way of treating wastewater. Basically, uh, we add a solid to this water, a solid with a high surface area, and active and passively, these molecules or heavy metal in this case will be entrapped into this solid, and then later this can be removed. So as I said, it's a mass transfer process, right? And the adsorbents, which are the materials that are used to clean this wastewater, they first either have to have chemical compatibility with the molecules or cations of interest, and normally are desirable to have high active surface area, such as carbon nanotubes, graphene based materials. The most mainstream material used is activated carbon, which presents a high surface area and can be tuned chemically as well. And going into more details for the adsorption itself, as I said, these materials, such as activated carbon, they need to present a very high surface area. They have tunable surface chemistry, and they are highly porous. It's very interesting to use carbonaceous materials since they are very light, right? And they can present both types of adsorption. In this case, physisorption is one of the types, basically by electrostatic interactions or a physical interaction between the molecule or cation, the adsorbate, and the adsorbent. But these could also be chemically bonded to the active groups on the surface of the adsorbent. So you can divide these two categories of adsorption, either physically, electrostatic forces, or chemically on the surface of your carbon. The problem is after using this carbon to clean the wastewater and to remove, to entrap these cations, they become solid waste themselves and they need to be treated. What is usually done is incinerating or encapsulating into cement, which is not, it's not adding value to this waste. It's basically treating it as waste. But there are some researchers that already showed that these materials can be electrochemically active. For example, this group used to recycle as electrocatalytic for water splitting. But the proposition of the thesis was actually to retransform the solid waste into electrode materials for energy storage applications. So basically make a battery out or a supercapacitor, a device to store energy using this waste that now contains heavy metals. So since we are talking energy storage, I'll just go briefly through how we expect this charge could be stored. There's a difference between supercapacitors and batteries. Basically, supercapacitors, they rely on a surface phenomena, so electrostatic phenomena, that you can store charge by applying a potential, and this charge will form what is called an electrical double layer on the surface of your electrode. So you want this electrode to have a very large surface. So you need a very porous materials, you need light materials with high surface area and high conductivity. And that's why activated carbon or graphene-based materials, they are ideal for these type of applications. So they are called capacitance and they rely on non-Faradaic phenomena. Basically, there are no chemical reactions. So once you apply a current, you see, once you shift the potential, you will see a constant current. These materials can provide high power, but batteries, on the other hand, they rely on chemical energy or electrochemical reactions. So the reactions, they happen at a specific potential and they can store a lot more of energy because you have active chemical species that will exchange electrons, and basically the amount of charge you can store basically depends on the molecular weight of these cations or molecules that will exchange electrons. So they can provide very high capacity coming from these redox reactions, but they happen relatively slower than what with supercapacitors. So the idea here is to mix both worlds, where you can store energy chemically or with the battery-like behavior of metals undergoing redox reactions, and on the surface with the high surface area of the carbon-based material. When you have these two contributions, what is expected is you have an additive response, all that in theory, between supercapacitor type reaction and Faradaic, which is the redox, the energy coming from the redox of the metals. So this is just to exemplify, once you have a powder that you would be loaded with a certain quantity of heavy metal. The more heavy metal you have, the lower the percentage mass of carbon powder naturally. So that would be the contribution from the doubler capacitance, just because you're decreasing its mass. And that would be the contribution of the metal. So the more metal you would have, the higher the energy it could contribute to your system. And overall, the total capacity is expected to be just the sum of both. So the more metal you would have in your system, the more capacity is expected that it will bring to this adsorbent. And as I said, the capacity is basically related to the molecular weight. So if you have lighter atoms or with a higher oxidation state with more electron exchange, you'll have a higher total increase in expected capacity. So in theory, everything should work nicely, and we would extract energy from the entrapped cations inside these spent adsorbents. And uh, that's overall my thesis work. So energy from garbage. So in this presentation, I will focus on the work that was done on the adsorption process, and then I'll explain a little bit how we developed a proof of concept for this theory that I just explained, and finally the mechanism investigation. So these two, adsorption and the mechanism investigation, they were possible thanks to remade. So most of this work was done under the remade umbrella, under the remade consortium. So to start with adsorption, during my secondment, well, one step before that, first of all, we needed to define a material to study. And we were tracking materials based, as I said, on surface chemistry and high specific surface area. That's to enhance the adsorption. But also, we wanted to convert it into batteries or energy storage devices. So it would be better if they would be electronically conductive. And when you have electronical conductivity and high surface area, we have electrochemical double layer capacitance, the supercapacitor energy storage type. Also, depending on the surface chemistry, we could see some pseudocapacitance. And our target was somewhere in between that would cover all these parameters, all these characteristics. So I initially thought of reduced graphene oxide, which is it's a derivative from graphite. It's basically exfoliated graphite that was expanded, then exfoliated, oxidized, and finally reduced back into reduced graphene oxide. So it keeps some of the properties of graphenes, such as the 2D structure. It recovers some conductivity and presents very high surface area. So that's an SEM image of reduced graphene oxide. You can see it's highly porous and it's floating in water, so very, very low density. And we chose a hydrothermal treatment to make these foams. So they ended up presenting a high surface area and a very easy synthesis process. So having selected the adsorbents, we needed to select the cation to study. So there are several cations that are environmentally relevant and that can be adsorbed in high amounts. So we would be able to test, such as lead, chromium, and mercury. For example, one close example is illegal gold panning in Brazil. I am Brazilian in origin, so that's an example that really caught my attention. But not only it would need to be environmentally relevant, it would need to be electroactive on the range, the electrochemical range that we are studying. So mercury is present in 3 different types of species at very low pH and in potentials that can be achieved, can be reached in aqueous systems. So mercury 2 plus was selected as the study case for most of this work. The methodology process developed was very straightforward. Basically, the RGO synthesized foam was mixed in the model wastewater solution, which was basically a mercury nitrate solution with non-concentration, with distilled water, no other competing cations, stirred for a certain time, and then the foam was recovered to make the electrochemical cell. So we wanted it to be as straightforward as possible with low energy input, right? And then we would analyze the water to see how much of the mercury was retrieved or adsorbed by the RGO foam. And we reached it at 250 milligrams per gram of foam, milligrams of mercury per gram of foam at pH 5, which is among the highest values in literature. So RGO demonstrated to be a very efficient adsorbent. But there was a question, and these research questions that led to the remade project, to contacting them, how would mercury be adsorbed by RGO? To answer this question, we assembled a microfluidic system with a peristaltic pump. So that was during my secondment at Chalmers under Professor Bjorn Wickman. And this Operando system with electrochemical quartz-crystal microbalance. So basically you have a quartz crystal, and here there's a fluidic system that will pass the flow of mercury solution. And this quartz crystal, it has a gold coated carbon that serves as an electrode to track whatever is happening at the surface of your electrode. So I casted this quartz with a reduced graphene oxide and made pass a flowing solution of mercury 2 plus at 50 ppm in nitric acid. So I adjusted, the pH was controlled, the temperature and concentration of mercury, and there was a constant flow of 1 milliliter per minute of mercury. So you can see here on the first graph, first I was flowing water, so we do not see a frequency change. That is frequency over here. I was tracking OCV also while doing that. And then once the mercury solution reaches the RGO, we see a very pronounced drop in frequency, which correlates to an increase in mass of this quartz. So we see the adsorption curve happening. The RGO mass is increasing as mercury is flowing. And then I was flowing again with water to see if the mass would come back to its original state. But that was not the case. There was irreversible change. So mercury was indeed adsorbed into the RGO. So we could see that in real time with the flowing of this mercury solution. And it was reaching about 50 milligrams of mercury per gram, since we can achieve that by the mass variation on the EQCM. And not happy with only EQCM, that's the part when we went to XAS. So we went to ALBA to perform more or less the same experiment. Here is a peristaltic pump, that was not a peristaltic pump, that was a syringe presser. So we had a syringe, it was controlling the amount of solution that was flowing with time. So the idea was the same. We were flowing mercury solution here, and inside this tube, we placed the RGO foam that was trapped there with some cotton. And we started flowing the mercury solution and also recording the XAS spectra operando. So we could see mercury going through the tube, and we could see the XAS, the L3 mercury edge changing with time. So you can see that mercury, just like in EQCM, it starts really fast, the mercury concentration, total mercury loading, and reaches a plateau after some time. So that's what we would call the saturation of the adsorbent. And the spectra changes from blue to red from the beginning of the adsorption till the end And that spectral change does not correlate to a change in oxidation state, but it indicates a different coordination environment, or a better defined coordination environment for mercury. And these two extremes could be correlated to physisorbed molecule mercury or chemisorbed mercury, and that was very intriguing in the beginning, since we can see it is competitively uh, decreasing with time. So we start really quickly with a chemisorption of mercury, and then the amount of chemisorbed mercury decreases relative to the what would be physisorbed one. And that was intriguing, since physisorption requires a lower energy, activation energy, to happen. But that was what we found on XAS, that mercury was first coordinating with oxygenated groups on the surface of RGO, and later it was mainly physisorbed or weakly attached to the foam. So that work, including the XAS and EQCM, has been published in the Journal of Environmental Chemical Engineering. So with all the remade team and my thesis co-authors, we were able to find a very distinguished adsorption mechanism for mercury, thanks to this analysis, and could relate the capacity of mercury adsorption to the functional groups on the RGO. Also, we were able to optimize these parameters for mercury capturing. And now that we had established methodology for obtaining, and we understood the mercury adsorption, we will need now to recycle this into the previous goal of the PhD, which was an energy storage device. So we would start with the RGO loaded with mercury. So here we see a comparison on the TEM between RGO pure and the one with loaded mercury. We do not see at this magnification a major difference, but once we zoom in further, we start seeing some bright dots on the RGO with mercury, and they make around 300 picometers, these bright dots, and that was associated to the mercury adsorbed on the surface, since you have a very high contrast between carbon matrix and mercury. Also, XPS detected the presence of mercury without nitrogen. So mercury 2 was indeed adsorbed, and it was not just deposited on the form of a salt or nitrate, since in the origin solution. And on these first tests, it was around 16 weight% by TGA and by DS of mercury. Mercury was mainly in the bulk of the RGO foam. And as I said, we wanted the recycling process to be as straightforward as possible, so low energy input. So recovering the RGO foam was directly from filtration after washing with distilled water, and the residue was directly transformed into electrodes without heat treatment or chemical treatment. And these electrodes were tested in Swagelok type cells against thick activated carbon electrode. So here you can see the cyclic voltammogram of the pristine RGO. So that's a typical EDLC envelope. So you have only double layer capacitance coming from the graphene. But once they're loaded with the mercury, they're beautiful redox peaks at around 0.62 volts versus She, which corresponds to this mercury redox reaction, and a capacity increase in 15% related to pristine RGO. So it is important to notice that RGO is already a material that is used in both worlds, so adsorption and energy storage. So it's already used and explored as energy storage material for high power application for supercapacitor. But once used as an adsorbent before, it increases its capacity by the heavy metals that it has entrapped. So if we calculate back how much capacity we get from the mercury containing RGO, we can calculate back what mass of mercury it would correspond, and it gives 14.5 percent in the total foam, given that we found 16 by EDX. So that also can correlate to the capacity that we obtain from the heavy metal. Right, these are galvanostatic charge. We see the mercury peak here. We see the mercury reduction peak here. So that was really clear that that was an electroactive cation absorbed on the surface. But we see a decrease in capacity with time, and we needed to understand this decrease. Also, so that was also another scientific question. All this work and this proof of concept was published in Advanced Energy and Sustainability Research. That was the first article of this thesis, and that's where the modal energy from garbage comes from. So, as I said, understanding the capacity fading and the charge storage mechanism was the next step, the next big step, and that's when remade comes into action. First of all, that was my secondment in Chalmers, where I did an Operando study with EQCM, the quartz microbalance. So that's the quartz crystal I mentioned. First, it was pure gold, and we cannot see an electrochemical response for that. Once it's coated with RGO, we see the RGO envelope as expected. And also, just to understand what to expect from the EQCM, we expect a mass change with the polarization of the electrode. So when we polarize positively, we expect the anions to come to the surface and a very pronounced mass increase. Once we polarize the electrode negatively, it's the other way around. We expect the cations to come, so a net mass variation. And what we saw was exactly that. So that's the mass variation of the RGO with the current. So once we had a positive polarization, we had an increase in mass, and then no polarization, we have a mass decrease, and that was reversible. So these are the same plot with different axes. We see a mass increase, a very pronounced mass increase in positive, and then a less pronounced mass increase since we are in sulfuric acid and we have protons as a cation. Okay, but okay, there's another animation that is showing, yes, the polarization and the anions that arrive to the surface, and here the protons or hydronium cations that come to the surface when we polarize it negatively. Now, with the presence of mercury, we see in electrochemistry the redox peaks that we expected. Now with the electrode coated with RGO containing mercury, and the mass variation, it starts the same way, but then when it reaches the first oxidation peak of the mercury, we see a very sharp mass decrease that corresponds exactly to the oxidation peak. And that happens repeatedly. So there is reversible mass decrease and then increase from mercury, from RGO containing mercury that was seen in EQCM. So that mass drop is associated to the oxidation of these mercury species into soluble, possibly mercury 2+. And then since we are polarizing it positively, that could locally repel the mercury 2+ cations that then are reabsorbed right? And that is what possibly causes this reversible mass variation. So it might desorb and also dissolve into the electrolyte irreversibly, and that's why we see a decrease in capacity also from the beginning. And okay, now from the electrochemical point of view, how charge is stored, right? We understood mass loss, we understood mass variation. Mercury is moving in the electrode. Uh, if we start cycling with a limited potential window, we do not see the mercury redox happening. But since we expand this potential window down to 0 volts versus hydrogen, the redox peaks of mercury start appearing. Then if we shrink back to the original voltage window, the peaks remain. So basically there is some sort of activation of this mercury that is present since the beginning. It's not electroactive unless you go down to 0 volts versus hydrogen. So we needed to understand what was going on also in this region, that we did not see electrochemistry, but we did see some change in mercury oxidation state or activation of mercury. So that was the next interesting question. Again, we went to the synchrotron for some Operando experiments at Alba. That's our Operando cell. It's basically in transmission mode. Here's a reference. Sodium. It's not silver chloride. It's mercury sulfate. And here a counter electrode of platinum. We could distinguish two independent mercury species. One that was definitely associated to mercury 2+, and the other here in blue that was associated to a more reduced form of mercury, which was not exactly mercury 0. So as we cannot identify the chemical species, but only the redox state, that's why the notation is like mercury 1 and not precisely as mercury 2+, for example. Okay, so these two species were detected during cycling, but not only we could see a staircase-shaped response that would correspond precisely to increase in mercury 2+ when we had an oxidation peak, and a decrease in mercury 1 when we have the same oxidation peak. So that was very interesting. So that was a reversible trend that we could confirm. But not only there was an accumulation of mercury 1 and a decrease in mercury 2. So on the long term, mercury 1 was irreversibly being produced and accumulated on the system. So here I have 3 graphs with the video that what was actually recorded during the Operando. On this side, there is the cyclic voltammetry. Here is the derivative of mercury 2+ content. So we expect it to increase in oxidation and decrease during reduction. And here is the fraction of mercury 1 in the electrode. So I'm gonna try to control this video. So we go slowly. Play. Yes. Yes. There you go. So on the first oxidation, we see here that the derivative shows a very intense production of mercury 2+, which is expected for this oxidation peak, while mercury 1+ was being produced during the first reduction cycle. And on this oxidation peak, mercury 1+ is reducing while mercury 2+ is increasing. And then on the following cycle, during this reduction peak, we see mercury 2 plus being consumed, while mercury 1 plus is being produced, right? And that was repeated during all the cycles. And you can see here on the right that the mercury 1 plus was accumulating. So the percentage of mercury 1 plus was increasing irreversibly. So that's the raw percentage of mercury 1 plus is increasing on every cycle. So that's indeed accumulating as the cyclic voltammetry was going. Another interesting feature here is this part between 0 and 0.2 volts versus She, where mercury 1 is irreversibly produced and mercury 2 is mostly irreversibly consumed. And that can be seen more clearly on this slide. First, you have the oxidation peaks, which we see in electrochemistry. And then we have these areas that do not correspond to any electrochemical signal. But there's something chemically happening there that is masked on the cyclic voltammetry, and it is out of the thermodynamic potential window for mercury. So we attributed that to the formation of mercury that was either electrochemically inactive or that could be dissolved in the electrolyte because that was irreversible. And probably a more complex mechanism for mercury, which is a very tricky cation that could not be discernible by Xanes. Here on the left is the total mercury content. So that was basically calculated from the XAS edge jump. And we would expect the total mercury in the electrode to remain constant throughout the cyclic voltammogram. But what we have is actually an increase in the total mercury that can be seen by XAS. And then on every oxidation peak, a decrease again. So as confirmed from EQCM, mercury, that could also be seen on XAS, that mercury was mobile. So that's the derivative of this curve. And mainly when we had the oxidation peak, we have this sorption-desorption mechanism happening with mercury, and that was seen independently by XAS and by EQCM, by the total mercury variation. And finally, with the Jülich team, we could see on TEM before on ex situ experiments. So that was before cycling the RGO with mercury electrode. Mercury is basically following the position of carbon as expected, since we saw that later it is mostly physisorbed on the surface of RGO. And then on post-mortem, after cycling, mercury starts following the position of oxygen. And it is possibly due to the irreversible formation of species that are not electroactive anymore, and they migrate throughout cycling. So that's to conclude on this topic. We could actually see the coupling between EDLC and Faraday on XAS. And we could see mercury was a mobile species during cycling, both by XAS and EQCM. Mercury 1 was accumulating, and there was a total mercury loss throughout cycling. And for sure, the electrolyte really influences on this, on the performance of these types of device, right? So this manuscript has been written about the whole XAS work and EQCM, all the Operando characterization electrochemical that we did, and it's currently, we are reviewing it. And all that is a path towards real applicability of these types of devices that use recycled materials that would be either considered waste as energy storage precursors, right? And just to finish, we were actually able to screen these dual purpose adsorbents and choose RGO as the one of the best materials to work in both adsorption and energy storage afterwards. So we could properly demonstrate a proof of concept that coupled both phenomena. And not only we went to a fundamental investigation with XAS and EQCM on why the mechanism behaves like that and how we can store the charge and how can we improve that for further studies, right? So that's a new path for recycled materials for energy storage. I would like to thank first the Remade project, which, as I said, allowed most of my thesis to be performed in a very international, very deep way. And the secondment laboratory in Chalmers with Patrick, Bjorn, and all the people that work together with me. And thank you all for the attention.